All right, so we've got 2 minutes. We're going to get started. I'm super excited. This was one of the most interesting ones to put together. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to get into today. All right, I can see everybody. Can everybody see my slides? I want to get a thumbs up in our last minute before we get started. Couple more seconds before we get started. Make sure my phone is silenced so you have my complete and undivided attention. Beautiful. All right, let's do this. So here we go. We're talking everything economic racism tonight. But before we do that, I want to introduce myself as always for anyone new in the room. So I am Eva Lauren Jean Charles. I am the founder of Black on Black Education. I have dedicated myself to supporting Black students. So my career, I work as an earth science teacher in the South Bronx, and I work on Black on Black education. I graduated from the CUNY Baccalaureate for Unique and Interdisciplinary Studies program, where I tailored my own personal degree to learn as much as I possibly could about social justice in underserved communities and educational inequity. So let's get started. A few things to note. We've got a super small group tonight, so it's going to get real intimate. I'm very excited about it. We'll see if a few more people trickle in as we go through. But a few things to note. We've created this super safe space right after the death of George Floyd. That was the start of the anti-racism series at Black on Black Education. And we are going to keep this going for as long as we possibly can. And so in this space, it is very active, very interactive. If there's ever a question, anything that you want to know, anything that I said that was unclear, please let us know in the chat so that I can direct that and answer that question for you. So it is a dialogue, not a monologue. Feel free to ask questions at any point. If you came to listen, that's awesome, but we do want to hear your voice because that is the point of these sorts of conversations. We really have to make sure that we are all actively working together to eradicate these systems of oppression. And then there will be breakout rooms later. Because they're such a small group, we'll probably just talk in a large group or maybe just split us in half, but we'll play it by ear as we move through. So if you're in a position to, please turn your camera on. We love to be able to see each other. That makes this whole process easier. The fact that we are apart and we cannot see each other, be close to people, it really does feel a lot more personal when we can see you. But if you can't, there is no pressure on that. And so let's get into our icebreaker. So I think I did decide I'm going to split the groups down the middle so that everybody has enough time. But for the next 3 minutes, you're going to have about 30 seconds to a minute to respond to one of these icebreakers. So I will put them in the chat so that you guys have them once the breakout rooms happen. But the 3 options today are if you had to delete all of your apps except for 3 on your phone and iPad, which ones would you keep? What is your favorite item that you brought this year? And what is your favorite dessert? So you can pick whichever one you want, and you'll have 30 seconds to a minute to respond in the group. After 3 minutes, you'll be brought back, and then we'll keep going with today's topic. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing just so I can take a second to put these in the chat. Is everybody clear on what we're doing? Anybody have any questions before we go out into the breakout universe? Awesome. So there are your 3 options. Breakout rooms are happening now. All those rooms are open. You can click that button. In 3 minutes, I'll see you back here. Closed. Everyone's back. I hope you got the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better. And so let me share my screen so that everybody can see where we're headed. So as always, we like to redefine what anti-racism is for anyone who is new. So for those of you who have been here, I know this is redundant, but when we got a newcomer, we got to make sure that they understand where we're coming from when we say anti-racism. So an anti-racist is defined as a person who works actively opposing racism. So it is not someone who says, I'm not racist, I'm all good. It's someone who knows that they have to advocate for change in their political, economic, and social life. And so there are multiple definitions of anti-racism, but this is the one that we keep top of mind as we create and conduct these events. So let's define economic racism. So I'm going to take a second. I'm going to give y'all about a minute. I want them to come into the chat, rolling into the chat. What are your initial thoughts when you think of economic racism? So what are the words or thoughts or ideas that come up for you? Let's put those right in the chat. I'm seeing a few things roll in. Unfair, inequity of opportunity for jobs. Okay. Anything else? Far-reaching. Anything else? We'll give it a few more seconds. Slavery, Jim Crow, present day, affirmative action in white communities. Needs to change now. Love it, love it. So we're all kind of in a very similar mindset, in a very similar idea. Practices and policies that enable white people to exceed more in terms of economic positions. Beautiful. So let's keep going. So defining economic racism. So there is no cut and dry definition of what economic racism is. What someone would call economic racism is not the same as what someone else would call it. But here are some components. Discrimination for several factors. So that's including race, which reduces the real income of both its targets and its perpetrators. It's also important to think about how much harder it is for Black children in low-income households to reach higher income brackets than for white children, and the environmental conditions such as racial bias accounts for the findings, right? So we know that there is a difference between the wealth gap between people of color and white people in this country. And there are so many different ways and reasons why we know that to be true. So we're going to continue to kind of walk through and talk through that. So let's start with the wealth gap. The net worth of a typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family. That's of some statistics that came out in 2016. And there are more statistics that are going to tell us that is going to continue, that gap is going to continue to widen if something is not done about it. And that something is actively anti-racist. It's knowing that there is an issue, a systemic issue in our country that needs to be resolved. So the ratio of white family wealth to Black family wealth is higher today than at the start of the century. So we know that this problem is getting worse and it's not going to stop unless we do something about it. White average wealth is $929,800. So that's 6.7 times greater than the average amount of wealth in a Black household, which is $138,000. So this is on average. Obviously, the uber wealthy people drag that that statistic. Averages make stats look crazy. And so it's harder to think about on a day-to-day the people who we know, the people that we would pass on the street. We know that Jeff Bezos is flying around in his private jet all over the place. So he is not the sort of folks that we're talking about. We're talking about these everyday people. There is still an extraordinarily large gap in wealth between white families and Black families. And so for those, let's look at those, right? The people who are in the top 10% of income, only 3.6% of those people in the top percent of income are Black. And the racial wealth gap is still quite large. The median net worth for white families in this income bracket is $1,789,300 versus $343,000 for Black families. So we know that even when we start to look at people who are making, who are in a high tax bracket, who are making a lot more money, even there's a wealth gap even there. So let's keep it going. So I'm looking at your question, Bernadette. I would love just some clarify the question a little bit so that I can answer it more specifically. But race is a definite factor in economic inequality. And so we can't deem race as the one and only factor that affects economic mobility, but it is one major factor. And we're going to start talking about the history of why that is. So if you just clarify that question for me, I want to make sure that I can answer it so that I'm specifically targeting what it is that that you're asking. So history of economic racism in the US. So we all know the building of this country was built on the backs of people who had to work for free for 246 years. And this is not including chain gangs, which happened very quickly after the Emancipation Proclamation, or mass incarceration that we still are seeing today. So we're just talking about free forcible labor for 246 years. And somehow we're expecting that as we move into years after slavery has ended, that we would be in a similar place in terms of economics if we know that for 246 years, while white people were building wealth, Black people were unable to do so. Then we move past the Emancipation Proclamation when slavery had officially ended in the United States in its current form, or in that particular form. We can talk about slavery in various different ways and how it still persists in our country today, but that is not our topic for tonight. But we can talk about the Reconstruction era, which is the era directly after the end of slavery, directly after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Black people began to increase their political power and economic power in places like Black Wall Street. And so in response to this, there were a lot of institutionalized laws, such as Jim Crow laws, and the use of physical intimidation to hinder this process. So if you look up Black Wall Street right now, you will know that it no longer exists because it was burnt to the ground by people who could not understand that Black people do have the intellect, the energy, the will to build for themselves, by themselves. And that was consistently broken down, not only by individuals, but also by systems, i.e. policy in our country. And then we keep going, right? We move into this moment in our country past the Reconstruction era, where we know that there's a lack of access to education in the Black community. Education positively correlates with white economic security. So we know that there are more white people getting bachelor's degrees. We know that there are more white people receiving doctoral degrees, MDs, law degrees, all of these sorts of things that allow for increases in economic wealth. And so the increase in inability to access education and higher education, trade school, things of that nature, that positively is going to correlate with the lack of generational wealth being built in Black communities and communities of color. We can also look at disparities in receiving loans. So it is very true that college is not for everyone. It is very true that moving into trade school is not for everyone. Entrepreneurship is a huge part of why the wealth gap looks the way that it does, the ability to build your own business. But it is important to know that most people do not have the money to build a business sitting in their backyard waiting for them when they're excited for it. Or they don't have a parent who can just say, here, there you go, build your business. I'm giving you my small business loan of $1 million. And so knowing that the vast majority of people do not have access to that, loans in this country have become extraordinarily important to being able to build wealth. But there are disparities in receiving loans. Overall, 17.8% of white borrowers were given higher priced mortgages when borrowing from large banks in 2006. So this is far removed from what people call a racialized America. This is the part of America where we're saying outwardly, not we, us, those of us not wanting to be anti-racist, we know that this is not true, but many people in this country think that we are in a post-racial society, a society where race no longer matters. But we are looking at statistics that tell us that that is not true. Yet 30.9% of Hispanics and a staggering 41.5% of African Americans got higher priced mortgages. So we are looking at an inability to build wealth from the perspective of buying a home because of racialized loaning practices by big banks in this country. And we can continue, right? So redlining. Redlining is a discriminatory practice that puts services, financial and otherwise, out of reach for residents of a certain area. So race and ethnicity, the ability for someone to own a home, we know that in white communities more often, home ownership is something that can be passed on from generation to generation. When we look historically at our country, that is not something that's been able to happen in many low-income, Indigenous, and Black and Brown communities. And so we have to start to think about anti-racism, how we can look at these sort of practices and dismantle them rather than say, oh, they no longer exist, but the beneficiaries of the practices existing still get to build wealth. The term redlining was coined by a sociologist named John McKnight in the 1960s and derives from how federal government and lenders would literally, so a lot of people, when you talk about redlining, think that it's just like this, it's similar to mass incarceration, where it's this word that is associated with something that doesn't necessarily, like, it's not just this, there's not a fine line, it's not perfectly defined. Redlining is not one of those things. Redlining is literal banks that literally took a red marker and drew circles around places where they would either charge much higher mortgages or would not allow Black people to buy or build land. And so this is how inner cities, communities of color were created. It was a red line, a marker by lenders and government officials that said that Black people, people of color, Indigenous people could only live, work, and buy land in these particular areas. So now we get into this conversation that has been happening for a very, very, very long time. A word called reparations. I have not really sat down and thought about what it would look like if reparations had happened in the United States, if they are to happen, if they were to happen. And so we wanted to bring this into this conversation so that we can sit and think and talk with one another about what it would look like to have reparations happen in this country. Economically, we have to see the divide between white communities and communities of color and Indigenous communities in the United States. And colonization does not stop when it did not stop when Great Britain went back and left the United States to become its own country. We've colonized the way that everything was done on this land before Great Britain came here. And so we have to start to think about what it would look like to be anti-racist, to look at what economic justice looks like and build and think about what that is. So some people believe that reparations is how we do that. Reparations are the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. Various other countries across the world have done this. We can look at Germany, we can look in various other places across the world where ills have been done to a community and reparations have been made for that. So let's look at some options that people have brought up about reparations. So anthropologist and author Jason McKennell notes in his book, The Divide, Global Inequity for the Conquest to Free Markets, that it's estimated that the United States alone benefited from a total of 222,505,049 hours of forced labor between 1916 and the abolition of slavery in 1865. So that is valued at $97 trillion today. $1 trillion today. So right now we're talking about the fact that there's a man who lives currently right now who is at the precipice of becoming a trillionaire, having $1 trillion of income, of profit in their business. But we know that times that by 97 is the amount of money that was created to build this country on the backs of people who were forced to labor without pay. So that's one thing to keep in mind as we talk about reparations. Some propose that the federal and state government, private businesses that financially benefit from slavery, that they owe a good portion of their wealth and should have to pay reparations. We are not saying that that's what we believe. We are saying that that's what's out there. And so we are having a conversation together about what reparations could look like in this country and what economic justice looks like in this country. So for some, this could include subsidized homes and mortgages, free tuition, financial support. So there are various different ways that people have thought and engaged with the idea of implementing reparations as a means for economic justice in the United States. So now it's time to chat. A lot has been said, a lot of words. We talked a whole lot. By we, I mean I. Talked a whole lot about how we look at the economy, how we look at how we've gotten to where we are, and how we look back at the history of our country. So what we're going to do now is jump into some breakout rooms. There's 10-minute sessions for the next 30 minutes because we have 3 different questions. We're going to split this group in half so that we can have a more nuanced conversation, because I think we have some really juicy questions that we're going to get into. As always, I'd like to note to remain respectful, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of how you feel about a particular topic. We want this space to be a dialogue. And so when there is a moment where you feel uncomfortable by something that someone said, or there is a moment where someone is rubbing you the wrong way, let's figure out a way to bring it back, because we've been able to do this for, what is this, 9 sessions now without any problems. We've had everyone feel super confident and comfortable with what has happened. And so we are going to make sure that we keep doing that as we move to the close of our 9th anti-racist event. So I know you're all dying to know it. What are we going to talk about for the next 10 minutes? Well, let's start talking about personal responsibility. This is a huge word, buzzword that gets brought around all of the time when we're talking about life in the United States, personal responsibility. So we want to start thinking about what we believe as people who came to this event wanting to know more about economic racism, what we believe our personal responsibility is in terms of eradicating economic racism and the wealth gap, and then begin to start talking about what the government's responsibility is. So as always, I am going to put that question in the chat so that everyone has access to it, because I am the queen of going into a breakout room and not knowing what we're supposed to do. So I want to get that into the chat. Those breakout rooms are coming. Does anyone have any questions before we hop into the breakout room? Bernadette, I 100% saw your question, didn't have the opportunity to read it all, so I will and address it once we come back from the once we come back to the big group. All right, those breakout rooms are opening. Enjoy. Welcome back. I think everything is closed up. I think everybody's made their way back. Amazing. Did we lose someone? I think we might have lost someone on our way. All right, so what did we talk about in the other group? What are some of the things that kind of came up for you guys? Let me correct myself. You all, working on my gender neutral language. Yeah, what came up in the other group?
I mean, everybody kind of shared ideas around supporting Black business. That was an agreement as what we can do as individuals. We had some differences in opinion on reparations. That might have been why we why we lost. Lost. I forgot her name. My take was that. Reparations should not necessarily be cash payments. Certainly not at this point. My feeling was that it a focus in on community development and education would be the most important method, because with our current institutions and the way things currently work is money doesn't stay in the Black community. And so if you just give a bunch more money, chances are it's going to flow into the current places that it's already flowing. The young lady who was on before, she vehemently disagreed and felt that we that people that she was like, I'll take the check, and believe that check would be I guess enough to allow for us to begin to build the economic power in our communities that we require.
Yeah. So you all started talking about the next question, because we were already going to have a whole part dedicated to talking about reparations, our thoughts and beliefs about it. But I'm glad that the conversation already started in the other group. Does anybody who was in the group with me want to hop off? I think we had some really incredible things that came up in our group as well. Most of you know, I'm a teacher. I'm really good at wait time. Anybody want to hop off mute and share with the group some of the things that came up for us in the other group?
I'll just say that I think her name was Bernadette. I kind of understand like where she's coming from by like saying that she would take the check because she's probably thinking about how she can do good for her and her family, which is like it's very understandable. But I also I kind of agree more with putting the money into the community because like it'll be more, I feel like it'll be more of an impact if you do that because it's like it'll affect not only one person in their family, but it'll affect like a bunch of people in a community that's struggling. So yeah.
It would theoretically be possible to do it both ways, where there's a certain amount of money that goes to a family for building wealth, like her point, but then also that a percentage of it would go to community development so that you would impact everybody. I think it's easier to get through, given what we know about white supremacy in our country, it would be easier to get through community development than it would be individualized checks.
Yeah.
Just looking for pushback from Republicans and Democrats and other white, supremacy folks.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think I agree. I think in our group, we started to talk about Black-owned businesses for sure and making that conscious choice. But then we had, again, Mpume. I want to make sure I don't say your name wrong. Mpume made sure that he brought up for us that it's also the withholding of the amount of money that we spend in communities that are not our own. So the amount of money that we invest into going to Walmart or going to Target or the easiest thing in the world, shopping at Amazon, all of these different places that are not Black owned, that are not for the culture, that can put Black Lives Matter as a tagline or put a Black person in their commercial, but doesn't put any money or political kind of beliefs backing the sort of systemic change that needs to happen in order for us to have a society that affects change and allows for people to live their lives in a way that is meaningful from an economic standpoint and aren't wheels in this cork of capitalism. And so we shied away from having a conversation about capitalism and thoughts and beliefs, but let's take it there, right? So the next question was already about reparations. Let's, as a big group, kind of take a moment to talk through and think through our thoughts and beliefs about reparations. So I know that we already started talking about it, so let's just keep going. What are people's other thoughts about reparations in this country and obviously in other countries where extraordinary racial inequity has occurred? What do we do? How do we create? What would reparations look like in a perfect world for you all? Wow, the silence is so stark. It's just like that ringing, and it's like, wow.
I'm thinking. Give me a second.
We've got some folks thinking. I will respect the thinking.
All right. So I agree with Kayla and Jamal and I said in the group because I made the same comments before in our own group. I don't personally agree with anyone who considers cash reparations, just to simplify, like I said, that financial literacy is not as strong in our community as is. And it's kind of defeating the purpose of finding out liberation economically of what we want to do and progress. I think putting it into the communities will allow what we want. My fear is that if not, then it will create another class of because I remember having a discussion with someone to talk about only giving descendants of slaves reparations and not all Black people, and I feel like that actually create another class of being poor. If you select only a certain population of Black people to give reparations to, and no one else who gets it is pretty much asked out. They are left with their hands tied and they can't do anything with it. Um, I personally feel like because the Black community by itself has $1 trillion of buying power each and every year. So you can put that and reparations together, and then you can see the progress we can make in the community in the sense of that as well. Um, I just think that it needs to be managed in a proper way, because once you get the money, or it shouldn't be all at once. I think it should be each year that we receive a certain amount in the community, and then accolade that towards the places that we want to fund and such like that, and then go on and on and on. And we get back up Black Wall Street and different main places. Um, that's my thoughts.
Mhm. I think what that brought up for me, I start to think about, so yes, absolutely, a cash payment of whatever it is. How does that work in term when you have a community where I mean, not even a community, most people in the United States of America, most people in the world do not have a large understanding of financial literacy. They don't. Like, we don't, most people don't understand the funding mechanisms of our country. Most people don't understand where the money comes from, how the money gets allocated, what to do with their money, how to save, how to invest. All of these sorts of things is something that a very select few people in our country and in the world have a very keen expertise and understanding about. I think what has been said thus far, what it brings up for me, is this idea that we live in a place where it's been hard and been fighting to get relief for a pandemic. So what does that look like when folks are looking for relief from something that doesn't feel tangible? COVID-19 is tangible. The bodies they've lined up, like it's there, it happened. We know that people have gotten sick. We know people are going to keep getting sick, and we know that people have died and are dying. And getting relief and getting funding and getting money out of our government here in the US has been difficult. So this is what brings me to have this conversation around reparations, of not how exactly do we go about it, because I think that that's a whole nother conversation. But if it was our nation, if it was our choice, what would we use that money for, and how would the money be allocated? Because I mean, in the reality is, those people who live in Washington, D.C., they have been arguing about giving relief for a pandemic where people are literally dying. So we know that they're not going to save us. So if it's us who are going to save us, how are we going to do that? What would that look like? Because in our breakout room, we started to talk about like the recreation and the reimagining of what society can look like. I want to start kind of doing that together. Welcome, Sharon. We're just in the middle of having a conversation about economic racism. We've really dug into the historical context here in the US, and now we're thinking about this recreation and reimagining of a world where there is no wealth gap. So what are some thoughts? What are some things that come up for people when we're doing this reimagining? It's really hard mental work.
So, I will mention one thing that I mentioned in the other group, and this is something that we'll all get an opportunity to hold, Joe Biden's feet to the fire on, is that he did commit to creating a commission to think through how to right the wrongs that this country has done to Black people, and I'm going to be curious to see what that commission looks like. I don't think I guess there are a variety of different studies that have been done on on reparations. I'm certainly not an expert at at said studies, but looking at a number of them at a cursory level, it would be interesting to have a group of people to sit down and have a debate that we all get an opportunity to see the details of, that help us to understand and guide us through what this is going to look like, because it's not going to go away. And reparations, repair is the root word, and some people can't even do that intellectually. They think it's all all over and all finished. So it's definitely not going to be as simple as, okay, hey, you know what I mean, cut a check, because you will then just have a whole other group of people like, well, where's my check? And you have to have the means to explain to them in some way that they can understand why this and not that. So you're gonna have to get some people smarter than me to sit down in the room and to hash this thing out. But I think it's something that has to be done kind of largely in front of us. Like we need to get to see, how this takes place, and it'll be interesting what happens.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. So let's continue to do some of that mental work, right? What are the things? So I think our last question was about and it's pretty much the same every time, right? Every time we've had one of these events, our question is what are we going to do? What is it that we want to do? What is it that we want to see from our government, and what are we going to hold their feet to the fire? So I appreciate bringing in the opportunity to talk about what commitments that we will make, because the reality is that, like I said before, they're not going to save us. That like, if there is anything that I have learned in my 22 years of living on this earth, and the history and the books and all of the things that you read about how you create a society where this is not a conversation. I'm sorry, my dog is being hilarious. Where this is not a conversation, the work has to happen on the ground. It has to happen with the people who are making this commitment. So you have all made your commitment to spend Tuesday night with us, to spend Tuesday night having this conversation and thinking about how we change the world. So what does that look like for you all? What is it that we even wanted to get from this event so that we can move forward in a society where we live in a place where we know that no one should be hungry? Like, without no uncertain terms, the United States of America, no one should be hungry. In the entire world, no one should be hungry. But then there are people who are hungry. That is a result of economic racism. That is a result of people being able to hold on to resources, hold on to money, hold on to just the power, and hold it and keep it in one area and not allocate it to those who make it possible. So let's continue to think about that. What are some of the commitments? What are we looking to see from that commission that my dad brought up about Joe Biden? What are some of the, like, what are the things that we want to see come out of that commission?
I would think that you'd want the data on where the discrepancies are between, you showed on the graphs originally about the differences in wealth between households. And I would think you would want to know where does that come from, right? Is it only a function of home ownership? Is it only, because if you count your home as your wealth, then okay, that's one thing. Is it a function of education and access to education? Like, a commission could look at where those discrepancies come from and then get policy ways to address them, making mortgages more available and more fair for families, African-American families and individuals, making education more accessible. I mean, some of the numbers on education at the higher levels where they generate the higher salaries are, really pretty impressive. Very, vanishingly small. The number of Black MDs in this country, male MDs in this country, is like 5% or something. I mean, it's crazy. So just kind of identifying where, I would think in part identifying where those discrepancies come from and what are the policy things you could do to change them. How could you actively dedicate money that would change that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are some other thoughts? You're on mute, Sharon.
Sorry.
No problem.
Can I ask, have you discussed like the prison system in terms of like racism?
So we started to talk about mass incarceration as a source of the divide, the wealth gap, the divide, but it hasn't been a large piece of this conversation, no.
Oh, okay. Because I think it is just pivotal that the American prison system is like privately owned. Like it's huge corporation, and I'm still just in the middle of the book, but I'm in the middle of Michelle Alexander's book of showing how that it leads to racism, and it's huge. And if you, I think that I think that it's best to get people's moral side on the idea that all people should not, you should not be making money off of their incarceration.
Mm.
Like you should be putting money towards their rehabilitation instead of the model for privately owned prison systems is that you have to get a constant influx. And this is prior to Michelle's book. I read the Shane Bauer's book on American prisons, and he has some statistics in there. He's of the population in the world, the United States has about 1/8, and of the prison population, the United States has 25%.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's huge. And they're leasing prisoners, they're making money off of that. And so to be able to tackle that, you are tackling big money. That's huge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a huge piece that was kind of brought into here that I love, that you brought it in, because even the idea that you can make money off of imprisoned people, while their families at home are struggling to make ends meet, because that's it is very difficult for a middle class family, what we consider middle class in this country, to live on a one parent, one person income. So then think about what it is for the average person who becomes incarcerated. They have a very small amount of income that they make. And so very often you have people that make up this entire prison system that come from low-income communities that in turn leave their communities and even make it harder for those communities and for their families to make money. So that's absolutely such a huge piece to this puzzle. And that's how we're starting to learn and starting to understand, as we continue to have these events, how interconnected every single piece is from the beginning to the end. It's race, it's prisons, it's class, it's all of the interconnectedness. It is extraordinary how you can't talk about one without the other. So I very much appreciate that key point being brought into the conversation. Is there anything else that's coming up for folks as it pertains to kind of the commitments that we're looking for from our government, the commitments that we're looking for from ourselves individually, from our families, from our communities, around really reimagining and looking at what a world can and should look like, where resources are equitably allocated?
I also want to mention that in one of the debates, Kamala Harris, and she didn't make much of a point of it, but she did say that they were going to rehabilitate the prison system. And I would stand on them for that. Like, I just like to really do something. Michelle Alexander says that Obama made some headway, not much, but it went in the right direction. And you have to, like, it's going to have a huge change. I think it's partly at the core of this, because once they're imprisoned, they're disenfranchised. Yep. Like anybody can deny them a job or a place to live or anything, you know. And so the American courts are not allowed. You're not allowed to take a charge of racism against them. It's just not you're not able to do it. So
Yes. And I
it's
can,
it
oh
it's
no,
at the, I think it's at the core of this. Like it changes people's attitudes towards people who have been um, in prison at all, you know,
yeah.
and
I I just want to give you a book suggestion since it seems like you're very interested in the prison system, mass incarceration. Incarceration Nation. It was written by Baz Dreisinger. She is a professor at John Jay College, my alma mater, and it's an incredible book because it not only talks about a lot of the things that you just talked about. It compares prisons across the world,
mhm,
and you're able to look at different ways that people look at and use prisons in various different countries, and how they're like what happens in the countries that use prison as like to truly use it as a source of rehabilitation, what those prisons look like as it compares to what happens here in the US. So I think that that would definitely be something very interesting for you to check out, to look at how it does also affect how the society operates economically. So 100%. And then there's the piece of the fact that like we talk about prisons and we're bringing prisons into this conversation. It's not just private prisons that contract and lease bodies of humans.
mhm.
Like when we needed hand sanitizer and like hand sanitizer was out all over the place, Governor Cuomo, I loved your daily reports, but Governor Cuomo sanctioned and allowed for prison labor to be used in order to create the influx of hand sanitizers and things that we needed here in New York State. And I'm sure that happened in various different states across the country. So when we're looking at again, the interconnectedness of all of these things. How is it that we have all of this money in New York State, but then when a pandemic happens, we don't know what to do and we have to use the labor of incarcerated people? So you're absolutely right that it is a huge core of this because there is so much money that is being used and allocated for that. That could be used and allocated for so many different things that would then help our society out of the hole that we are currently existing in. All right. Well, we have had such a fruitful conversation. I'm so excited. And so I want to give folks the opportunity to ask questions, comments, anything that's lingering for you. We might head out a little bit early. We had a small group today. So this is awesome. I will give everybody back some of the time that they had already committed to Black on Black education. But here is our question and answer section. I am not the spokesperson for Black people, so I cannot answer all questions for everyone, but I can answer anything that folks have kind of lingering for them as we move to the end of the event.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think we all ingrained so much in this conversation. We're all just kind of like, I have to debrief. And so we are here at the end. We have a few minutes left. And so I want to give everyone the link to our Black-owned business resource guide. So we created a Black-owned business resource guide. If you are doing your holiday shopping and you are wondering how you can make a small contribution and a small commitment to to eradicating economic racism in this country, you can support the businesses that are all over this country and all over the world, by Black people who are trying to make sure that they invest in their own communities. Please, 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 please shop Black for this Christmas. There's hair care products, there are accessories, there are candles, there are lamps, there are paintings, there are I think that there's even, what else is there? There are like, if you are looking to work out, there are like everything that you could think of is here. There are incredible resources that were created all over the internet, and we wanted to compile those and make it as easy as possible for folks to buy Black this Christmas, for holidays, birthdays, anything else. You'll always have this guide available on our website to support Black-owned businesses and make sure that they are reaping the benefits of the hard labor that they do. If you want to have more of a conversation around financial literacy, financial capability, and your ability to work and push for change in, oh my gosh, like all of the words that were there, just they disappeared. and just want to have more conversations about financial capability, financial literacy, particularly in the education space. We do have a podcast and we talk all about that with our dear friend Chelsea Addison. So you can check that episode out. The link is headed in the bio and it will also be sent in our follow-up email. If you want to look super awesome, like some of the folks I see in here, you can support us by buying a t-shirt. Anna, yours are coming in the mail. Almost, we put them in there. I don't know if you got them yet, but they're coming. So thank you so much for supporting us. And if
They got here.
Yes, I'm so happy. I can't wait to see you wearing one. So yes, t-shirts, it's a great conversation starter. Every single time I wear it, someone stops me and asks me what was going on my shirt. So it is there for you. Link is coming in the bio. Also will be in the, what am I saying? Like I just lose words sometimes. Will also be in your follow-up email. And then donate. Black on Black Education is a very small business. We are working our way up. We are trying our absolute best to continue the work that we do. And so when you donate, it makes it a lot easier. And then lastly, and most importantly, please fill out our post-conference survey. Feedback, I like thrive on feedback. I go to the survey after every event so that I can read what you felt, what you learned, what you wanted to learn from this event, and what you still want from us. What are events that you want us to have? What are conversations that you still want us to go through? So please fill out that survey if you have a chance. If there are lingering questions, I am somebody that takes a little bit of time for me to process. I think of questions like I'm gonna log off and be like, oh my gosh, I should have brought that up, or I should have said that. So if you're anything like me, my email is eva@blackonblackeducation.com. Our Instagram is @blackonblacked. Our Twitter is @blackonblackeded. DM us, email us, and we will get back to you. And thank you. Black on Black Education appreciates you being here because without you, there would be no anti-racism event. So thank you so much for spending your Tuesday evening with us. Have an incredible end of the year. This is our last event for the year. We will see you hopefully in 2021. Have a great evening. Enjoy yourselves. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody has lingering questions. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Anna. See you on Thursday.
We're very excited.
I can't wait.
Wonderful. You guys offered it. We got a good group. So I think they're going to be happy to participate.
Yes, that is what I'm getting into immediately after this, setting up the
Oh my
slides,
God.
getting ready for it. I'm so excited.
Right. Never
All right,
rest.
have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.
We're going in. Thank you again.